The space between stars was always silent. But inside the hull of the old freighter, that silence had weight, a presence that pressed against every breath, every thought, like a secret no one dared speak aloud. He had been a man of few illusions, even before the war took everything from him. A man whose hands were scarred by wrenches and solder burns, whose heart had been cauterized long before he found himself adrift in the cold corridors of the galaxy's forgotten edges. They gave him a girl, a broken alien girl with hair the color of flame and eyes that had once known war. They told him she was his to use, to discard, to break again if he wished. She was nothing, they said, a thing, not a person. A failed experiment from the Dominion's dark vaults tossed to him like scraps for a scavenger. But when he looked at her, slumped in the battered chair, her breath ragged and uneven, he saw something the Dominion could never erase. Hope. A memory, perhaps. A chance to mend what had been shattered in himself. The hum of the ship was the only music in that moment, soft, steady, alive. He moved with deliberate care, approaching her as if she were a relic of a forgotten faith. Her skin, marked by scars and alien circuitry, was a testament to the violence that had forged her. Her red hair glowed like embers against the cold metal of the hull. She did not look at him. Her gaze was fixed on something distant, some memory, some code fragment replaying in the darkness of her mind. He wondered what she saw in that quiet pain. He could have turned away, left her to the fate they intended for her. But there was a promise, unspoken but real, that whispered in the spaces between their heartbeats. "I will not be what they made me to be," he thought. Not this time. She stirred as he reached her, the tremor of her muscles barely contained by the fragile cage of her body. A low, guttural breath escaped her throat, a sound that was not language but closer to prayer. He saw the fear in her eyes, buried beneath the defiance. The Dominion had taught her to obey, to fight, to kill. But it had never taught her how to be free. He knelt beside her, his hands calloused but steady. In the dim light of the freighter's core, he offered her a single word. "Safe," he said softly, as if the word itself might fracture the silence. Her eyes flickered, meeting his for the briefest of moments. Then they closed again, as if she could not bear the weight of his promise. He did not force her to respond. He simply remained, a quiet presence in the room's stillness. Outside, the stars burned cold and unfeeling. But inside, there was a flicker of something different, a spark that might one day become a flame. He would not abandon her, and she in time would learn what it meant to be more than a weapon. The Dominion ship arrived without a warning, slicing through the void like a blade of obsidian. No sirens, no transmission, just the shimmer of its gunmetal hull gliding silently above the orbital dock, as if the universe itself had been holding its breath. He watched from the viewport, muscles tensing with old memories. They had told him nothing of their purpose, but he had seen enough war to know that the Dominion's silence was never an accident. In their quiet, there was always a message. When the airlock hissed open, he was already there, waiting, the weight of his revolver heavy against his side. A man of iron and oil, his tattoos telling stories of battles he no longer spoke of. His eyes, grey as dying embers, never left the emissary who stepped through the hatch. The Dominion's envoy was as cold as the void, tall, in ceremonial armor that gleamed with silver tracery. His face was a mask of perfection, skin biocircuitry flickering beneath the surface like veins of molten glass. And behind him, floating on a sled of repulsor coils, was the girl. She was not awake. Not really. The stasis pod held her in a half-life, limbs slack and hair drifting like crimson smoke in the fluid that kept her heart barely beating. She looked almost peaceful in that suspension, but he saw the tremor in her fingers, the echo of some memory fighting its way to the surface. The envoy spoke in the Dominion's clipped tongue. "This one is yours now," he said. "A gift, a thing to keep or discard." He wanted to spit at the word, a thing. That was how they saw her, how they saw everything they touched. He said nothing, only watched the girl's face, pale and silent behind the curved glass. Her body was a lattice of alien alloys and scars. Her breath was a ghost caught between worlds. The envoy's gaze flickered to him, cold amusement in the curve of his lip. "She is defective," he said, "a weapon that cannot obey. The Dominion recycles such failures, but we have other uses for them." He felt the words in his gut, the weight of them like iron chains. He should have turned away, left her there in that floating coffin. But the Dominion had stolen enough from him already. He reached out, his hand brushing the glass. The fluid inside shimmered, catching the light in 1,000 fractal reflections. Her skin was marked by ink and code, but beneath that, something else. A pulse, a spark. The envoy was already gone by the time he looked up. The Dominion did not wait for answers. They left their gifts and their threats behind, trusting that the silence would do the rest. He stood there for a long moment, the only sound the soft hiss of the ship's systems cycling down. Then slowly he keyed the emergency override on the stasis pod. The gel began to drain, the soft whisper of air replacing the cold embrace of cryofluid. When the pod cracked open, she fell into his arms like a puppet whose strings had been cut. She did not speak. Her eyes flickered, half blind, scanning the unfamiliar light. Her breath was shallow, the pulse in her throat erratic. She was not conscious, not truly, but somewhere beneath the flicker of her implants, she was still there. He carried her down the corridor of the freighter, the ship humming beneath his feet like a promise. Each step echoed in the narrow metal hall, a slow march through the darkness he had made his home. He laid her on the spare cot in the corner of his workshop. The room was cluttered with relics of his trade, wrenches, data slates, the faint scent of soldered circuits. It was a place of work, of sweat and rust. But he turned the lights down low, soft enough to cradle her in warmth instead of glare. She did not move. Her body was a map of pain, every line of her frame etched with the history of what had been done to her. But he watched her chest rise and fall, and he knew she was still fighting. He pulled the neural interface from the base of her skull, an old Dominion relay meant to control, to command. It came free too easily, the circuits frayed, a sabotage that spoke of desperation. And then he sat back, silent as the stars outside, and waited for her to open her eyes. She woke in darkness, the stale air of the ship pressing against her skin like an old memory. Her mind was a shattered archive, fragments of data and sensation colliding in a storm of half-formed thoughts. Each breath tasted of oil and ozone, of metal and sweat, but none of it was familiar. Her eyes opened to a dim glow, warm and golden, soft against the battered steel walls. It was not the cold white of Dominion lights, not the sterile brightness of the labs where they had rewritten her mind. This was something older, something real. She shifted, her body a map of pain, muscles locked, wires tugging at bone like angry ghosts. The implants in her spine flickered with disordered pulses, each jolt a reminder of what she had been made to be. The man was there, silent and steady. He knelt beside her, his eyes the color of twilight over a dying world. Tattoos coiled around his arms and across his chest, black lines that spoke of violence and survival. But his hands, when they reached to steady her, were gentle. "You're safe here," he said, his voice low, shaped by years of smoke and steel. She wanted to believe him, but the word safe was a language she had never learned. She tried to speak, but her throat was raw, her tongue thick with the memory of sedation. The first sound she made was a dry rasp, more breath than word. He didn't flinch, only reached for a canister of water and placed it in her trembling hands. She stared at it, at the condensation beading on the metal, at the simple weight of it in her palms. It was heavy, real. Not an IV line, not nutrient slurry forced through a tube. Just water. She drank slowly, each swallow burning like fire down her throat. Her eyes never left his face, searching for the lie she expected to find. "You don't have to trust me," he said, reading the question in her silence. "But I won't hurt you, not ever." Her fingers twitched around the canister, her thoughts a blur of code and instinct. She had been made to kill, to follow orders without question. But here, in this small space that smelled of solder and sweat, there were no orders, no voices in her head demanding obedience. She didn't know what to do with that kind of freedom. "Who are you?" she asked at last, the words cracked and thin. "Jax," he said simply. "Just Jax." A name, not a rank or a title, just a name. She turned it over in her mind like a puzzle piece, unsure how it fit into the broken mosaic of her world. She tried to sit up, and pain lanced through her side, bright and sharp. She gasped, her fingers digging into the mattress, but Jax didn't move to help her. He watched, patient, as she found her balance. When she finally managed to sit upright, he gave a small nod as if to say, "You did that, not me." The small victory tasted sweeter than any Dominion command. Her hair fell over her shoulders in a red cascade, damp from the cryo-fluid that still clung to her skin. She pushed it back with a shaking hand, her eyes darting around the room. There were no restraints, no surveillance nodes, just the hiss of recycled air and the soft hum of the ship's power core. She realized with a start that she was not in a cell. This was not a Dominion ship. The walls were irregular, patched and scorched from years of labor. The scent of rust was stronger than bleach. "Where am I?" she asked. "My ship," Jax said, "the Iron Wren." The name meant nothing to her, but the way he said it, the quiet pride in his voice, told her enough. This was his domain, his world, and somehow, for reasons she could not understand, he had chosen to share it with her. She closed her eyes, the weight of exhaustion pulling at her like gravity. Memories flickered at the edges of her thoughts, faces, voices, the stench of blood and ozone. She forced them back, focusing on the present, on the slow rhythm of her breath. "Why?" she whispered. "Because they gave you to me," he said. "Like a weapon, like a prize. And I've spent enough of my life being told what to do." She looked at him then, really looked, and saw the scars beneath the ink, the lines of grief etched into the corners of his eyes. He was not a man who bowed easily to fate. "Rest," he said, his voice a soft command she didn't mind obeying. "You're safe here, for as long as you want to be." And for the first time in longer than she could remember, she let the words carry her down into sleep. Sleep was not gentle. It was a battlefield of memory and broken code, of commands that had no place here and voices that had no more power. She drifted in the darkness, caught in the static of her own mind, each breath a negotiation between the girl she had once been and the thing the Dominion had made her. When she woke, it was to the soft clink of metal against metal. Jax was at his workbench, the glow of a half-lit monitor washing over his face. He didn't look up when she stirred, his hands steady, as he calibrated a piece of alien tech she couldn't name. She watched him for a long moment, the way his brow furrowed in concentration, the slow rhythm of his breath. There was something calming in it, something that spoke of a world where time was measured not in orders and protocols, but in the slow, careful work of living. She shifted, testing her strength. Her legs were stiff, the biomechanical joints clicking softly as she moved. Each motion was a negotiation between her will and the Dominion's sabotage, a dance she was only just beginning to learn. Jax looked up at last, his eyes catching hers across the dim room. He said nothing, only offered her a small nod, a silent acknowledgement of her effort, her will. She pushed herself to her feet, the strain of it making her jaw clench. She took a step, then another. Her fingers brushed the wall, steadying herself. Each movement was a defiance, a rejection of the Dominion's verdict. "Careful," Jax said, his voice soft. "You don't have to rush." "I need to," she said, and though her voice was raw, it was steady. He didn't argue, he only watched, a quiet witness to her stubborn fight. She made it to the workbench, her breath ragged, muscles shaking. She leaned against the edge, her fingers brushing the tools laid out there, wrenches and data prods, the scattered bones of old machines. "What are you fixing?" she asked. He looked down at the device in his hands, then back at her. "A memory coil," he said. "From a wreck I found drifting near the Perseid Rim. Thought there might be something worth saving in it." She tilted her head, her red hair falling like a curtain across her face. "You salvage memories?" He smiled faintly. "Sometimes the past is worth piecing back together, even when it hurts." She looked at the coil, the faint glow of its core pulsing like a heartbeat. She understood that pain, the ache of things half remembered, half lost. "Do you think—" She hesitated, the question catching in her throat. "Do you think I can be fixed?" Jax's expression softened. He set the coil down and stepped closer, his hand brushing a stray lock of hair from her forehead. "You're not broken," he said. "Not in the way they meant. You're hurt. That's not the same." She closed her eyes, the words sinking into her like balm on a wound. "Hurt, not broken, not discarded." "I don't know how to be anything but what they made me," she whispered. "Then we'll figure it out together," he said. "One piece at a time." A silence settled between them, heavy but not cold. She let it wrap around her, a blanket woven from the low hum of the ship and the slow beat of her heart. Outside the viewport, the stars burned in their ancient patterns, cold and bright and indifferent. But here, in this small space of warmth and shadow, she felt something she had almost forgotten. Hope. Jax reached for a small container, setting it on the workbench between them. "You need to eat," he said. "Your body's still catching up with itself." She looked at the rations inside, simple human food. Nothing like the sterile nutrient pastes the Dominion fed its soldiers. She took it slowly, the taste unfamiliar but real. As she ate, Jax returned to his work, his hands moving with a craftsman's patience. She watched him, her mind turning over questions she didn't know how to ask. When the meal was done, she set the container aside, her strength spent. But she didn't sit back down. She stood there, steadying herself on the workbench, and met his gaze. "Thank you," she said quietly. Jax nodded once. "You don't owe me anything," he said, "but I'm glad you're still here." She smiled, a small, fragile thing, but it was real. And in that moment, it was enough. The ship moved through the void like an old ghost, each ripple of the engine's pulse a quiet reminder of its heartbeat. The Iron Wren had been built for war, then rebuilt for something closer to peace. Jax's hands had turned the Dominion's cast-offs into a sanctuary of humming wires and warm air. She had begun to learn its rhythms. The way the pipes sighed when the power cells shifted. The faint click of the stabilizers during micro-adjustments. It was a song she didn't yet know how to sing, but she was listening. Jax watched her learn. He offered no orders, only quiet observations, small gestures of care that didn't ask for anything in return. In those silences, something began to shift in her. Not trust, she wasn't ready for that, but the first glimmer of it, a seed. One night, she woke to the sound of strings. Not the Dominion's sterile, synthesized music, but something raw, human. Jax sitting by the bulkhead with a battered guitar in his hands. His fingers coaxed out a melody that was rough and imperfect, but alive. She watched from the shadows, breath held. The notes were soft, half-formed memories in the air, and she realized she had never heard anything like it. When he finished, he looked up. "You're awake," he said, a quiet smile in his eyes. She didn't answer at first. She just stepped closer, her fingers brushing the cool steel of the wall to steady herself. "What was that?" she asked, her voice hushed, as if afraid to break the spell. "Music," he said. "Not the kind they make in the labs. This is just sound, emotion made real." She nodded slowly, though she didn't fully understand. But the way it made her chest ache, the way it pulled at something deep inside her, she knew it was important. "Can you show me?" she asked. Jax tilted his head, studying her. Then he shifted on the crate, the guitar resting across his lap like a living thing. He held it out to her. She hesitated. Her fingers were built for weapons, not melodies, but she reached for it anyway, her hands trembling as she took it from him. The strings buzzed under her touch, the resonance alien and beautiful. She didn't know how to make them sing, but the weight of the instrument in her hands was a revelation, a thing that existed only to create, not to destroy. "Why did they give me to you?" she asked suddenly, the question tearing free from some quiet corner of her mind. Jax's expression hardened for a moment, then softened again. "Because they thought I'd use you like they would," he said. "Because they think everyone sees the world the way they do." "And you don't?" she pressed. He met her gaze. "I've seen too much to believe in their lies." She let that settle between them, the ship's hum filling the quiet spaces. She didn't know what to say. She only knew that in the Dominion's world music had never existed, only commands, only silence. Now there was a melody. She handed the guitar back to him, her fingers lingering on the worn wood. "Play it again," she said softly. And he did. She woke the next morning to the soft glow of amber light and the ship's steady sigh. Her dreams had been softer this time, no commands, no pain, just the memory of the guitar's voice still echoing in her chest like a promise. Jax was there when she opened her eyes, sitting cross-legged on the floor beside the cot. His expression was unreadable, his hands busy reassembling a small drone's core, the delicate circuitry glinting like constellations under his fingertips. "You slept longer," he said without looking up. His voice was low, almost gentle. "Your body needs time." She shifted carefully, the familiar ache of half-repaired implants humming in her bones. "Time," she repeated, as if tasting the word for the first time. "You have it here," Jack said. "As much as you need." She studied his face in the half-light, those tired eyes that had seen too much, the faint lines at the corners that deepened when he smiled. She wondered what had been taken from him to make him this quiet, this kind. "Why did you stay out here?" she asked, her voice low. "This place, it's nothing." He looked up at last, the faintest smile touching his lips. "Because out here, no one tells you who to be, no one decides what you're worth." The Dominion had taught her that worth was a measurement of utility, of obedience. But here? She wasn't sure what she was, or who. She forced herself to sit up, her breath ragged, muscles trembling with each movement. She refused to let him help her. Every inch she claimed for herself was a victory, even if it hurt. When she was upright, she let the silence stretch. She had learned that Jax would not rush her, that he would wait as long as it took for her to find the words. "Do you think I was ever real?" she asked, her voice so soft it was almost a whisper. He set the drone core aside and leaned forward, his gaze steady. "What do you mean?" "I was built to be a weapon," she said, "programmed, engineered. I don't know if any of this—" She pressed a hand to her chest, fingers trembling. "If any of it is mine." Jax was quiet for a moment, as if measuring each word before he spoke. "You're here now," he said. "Breathing, choosing. That's as real as it gets." She let out a shaky breath, her eyes stinging. The Dominion had never spoken of choice, only purpose. Only the next mission. "I don't know how to be anything else," she admitted. "Then don't," Jack said. "You don't have to be what they wanted. You can be what you choose." She looked at him, searching for the catch, the lie. But there was only the quiet certainty in his eyes, the unspoken promise that he would not let her slip back into the darkness they'd pulled her from. Outside the viewport, the stars drifted in their slow dance, cold and distant. But inside the iron wren, there was a warmth she hadn't expected, a rhythm that didn't belong to the Dominion. She closed her eyes, and for a moment she let herself believe it. The days blurred together in the quiet of the iron wren. She learned the layout of the ship by touch and instinct, memorizing the gentle groan of the bulkheads when the engines fired, the way the metal floor hummed with life when the gravity stabilizers cycled. Her body was slow to trust the quiet. Every step was a negotiation, every breath a reminder that she was not what they had designed her to be. But with each dawn, she took one more step, one more breath. Jax never rushed her. He worked in the shadow of the engine core, his hands steady and sure as he stripped Dominion tech down to its bones and rebuilt it in his own image. Sometimes she watched him, fascinated by the calm in his movements. Other times, she let herself drift, letting the ship's heartbeat drown out the echoes of commands she no longer obeyed. One night, she found herself in the small observation bay at the back of the ship. The viewport curved outward like the eye of a god, showing her a sweep of stars that felt impossibly vast. She pressed her palm to the glass, feeling the cold bleed through her skin. Jax found her there. He didn't say anything, just stepped up beside her and let the silence settle around them like a blanket. "Do you ever wonder what's out there?" she asked, her voice almost lost in the vastness. He looked at her, then at the stars. "Every day," he said. She turned to him, studying the way the light of distant suns traced lines of gold across his face. "Do you ever want to go back?" she asked. "To the worlds that made us?" Jax shook his head slowly. "I've seen enough of what they can take. Out here, it's not perfect, but it's ours. Ours." The word tasted strange in her mouth. She had never belonged anywhere, not to the Dominion, not to the world before. But here, in this battered ship that smelled of solder and sweat, there was room to be more than a weapon. She looked back at the stars, her reflection ghost-like in the glass. "I don't know who I am," she admitted. Jax's hand brushed hers, light as a promise. "Then you get to decide." She closed her eyes, letting that truth settle in the quiet spaces of her mind. She was not a soldier now, not a tool, not a thing. She was something else. The next morning, she woke to the soft buzz of diagnostics in her skull. Jax was already awake, soldering a small circuit at the workbench. She watched him in silence, the rhythm of his work hypnotic. "I want to help," she said. He looked up, surprised. "You don't have to. I want to," she said again, firmer this time. "Show me." Jax hesitated, then smiled. "All right," he said. "Let's start simple." He placed a small motor on the table between them, the metal shell cool beneath her fingertips. He showed her how to strip the casing, how to trace the lines of power through the coil. Her fingers trembled at first, clumsy, too used to violence, but he didn't rush her. He guided her hands, his voice a steady current in the quiet. "You don't have to be perfect," he said. "Just willing." She let out a shaky breath. "I'm willing." And in that moment, for the first time since she had woken in the darkness, she felt the faintest flicker of pride. The ship drifted on silent engines, a ghost in the sea of stars. But inside, there was life. In the low hum of power lines, in the scent of solder and old coffee, in the faint echoes of laughter she hadn't expected to hear. She spent hours in the workshop, her fingers blackened with oil, her breath quick with concentration. Jax taught her how to read the hidden language of circuits and wires, how to coax a spark from dead metal. She learned slowly, but she learned. And in those hours, something inside her began to shift. There were still nights when the old commands pressed against her thoughts like a hand at her throat. She would wake in the dark, body rigid, breath coming in shallow gasps. The Dominion's voice was gone, but its ghost lingered in her bones. Jax never asked what haunted her. He only sat with her, his quiet presence an anchor in the swirling dark. Sometimes he played the guitar, the gentle scrape of strings a lullaby that banished the worst of the memories. Sometimes he said nothing at all. In that silence, she found space to breathe. One evening, she was tracing power lines through a half-repaired console when she spoke, her voice low and hesitant. "I remember music," she said. "From before the labs." Jax looked up from his work, his hands pausing. "Tell me," he said softly. "It wasn't Dominion," she said. "It was warm, human. I don't know where I heard it, or why, just the sound." He nodded, his eyes steady on hers. "Music is memory," he said. "It gets in deep." "Hold on." She let that settle in the quiet, her fingers absently twisting a copper wire. "I want to remember more," she said. "Not what they put in me, what was mine." "You will," he said, one step at a time. She met his gaze and saw the quiet certainty there. No promises he couldn't keep, no illusions. Just the truth, that healing was a choice, and she was free to make it. Later that night, she sat alone in the observation bay, watching the stars wheel past. Her reflection stared back at her from the glass, a face she barely knew, framed by red hair that glowed like a brand in the dim light. She touched the glass, feeling the chill of the void beyond. "I'm still here," she whispered. The words tasted like defiance, like hope. And in the quiet that followed, she felt the first flicker of who she might become. The days grew longer in the warmth of the iron wren. She had begun to reclaim her body, each step a small act of rebellion against the Dominion's designs. The circuits that once bound her to another's will now hummed with her own pulse, the crackle of half-forgotten memories waking slowly in her mind. She had not yet found the name for what she was becoming, but every time she met Jax's quiet gaze, she felt closer to it. One evening, as the ship drifted through a quiet sector of dead stars, she sat at the workbench with Jax. He was showing her how to calibrate a data coil, how to listen for the smallest pulse of life in the static of old circuits. "Slow," he said, his fingers brushing hers to steady her hands. "The coil will tell you if you let it." She nodded, her breath catching at the softness of his touch. She focused on the tiny spark of energy, feeling it shiver under her skin. For a moment, she forgot the Dominion's voice, the weight of old commands. "You're a natural," Jax said, a smile tugging at the corner of his mouth. She looked up, a flicker of something warm in her chest. "Maybe I'm just learning to listen." He chuckled, the sound low and rough. That's the first step. Silence settled between them, comfortable and full. She realized she liked it, the quiet that was not empty, but alive with possibility. "Why do you trust me?" she asked suddenly, her voice almost lost in the hum of the ship. Jack set the coil down, his eyes steady on hers. "Because you're still here," he said. "Because you keep trying." She swallowed, her throat tight. No one had ever measured her worth in effort before. Only in results. She reached out, her fingers brushing the back of his hand. "I'm still trying," she said, the words trembling like a first breath. He turned his hand over, his palm rough and warm against hers. "That's all that matters," he said softly. For a moment, she let herself believe it. That night, she dreamed of fire, red hair tangled with stars, the weight of the guitar's music echoing in the dark. When she woke, she was alone in the small room, but the echo of that music lingered like a promise. She pressed a hand to her chest, feeling the steady rhythm of her heart. "I'm still here," she whispered again, and this time the words felt like a vow. The iron wren drifted in the dark, its hull scarred and ancient, but alive. She moved through its narrow halls with more surety now, each step a quiet defiance of the Dominion's chains. Jax watched her with that same steady calm, never pushing, never demanding. In the Dominion, she had been a tool, a thing to be sharpened and discarded. Here, she was a question still unfolding. One morning, she found him in the engine room, sleeves rolled up to his elbows, black ink and burn scars visible in the warm light. He was singing softly to himself, a rough, tuneless melody that made her pause in the doorway. She didn't know the words, but she knew the feeling. It was the same ache she felt in the spaces between her breath, the same quiet yearning that hummed beneath her skin. "You sing," she said softly. He looked up, startled. "Badly," he admitted, a sheepish grin crossing his face. "I like it," she said, and she meant it. He nodded, wiping grease from his hands. "You're up early." "I couldn't sleep," she said. "The memories, they don't stop." Jax set his tools aside and crossed the room to stand in front of her. "They're just echoes," he said. "They can't hurt you here." She wanted to believe him. She wanted to leave the Dominion's ghosts behind, but they were etched into the very circuits of her mind. "Help me," she said, her voice trembling. "Help me make them quiet." He didn't hesitate. He reached out, fingers brushing the back of her neck, where the Dominion's interface had once been. "I've been working on something," he said, "a way to overwrite the old code. It won't be perfect, but it might give you a clean start." She closed her eyes, leaning into his touch. "Do it," she whispered. Jax guided her to the chair beside the console, his hands steady as he connected the leads to the ports at the base of her skull. The interface was cold against her skin, the flicker of power a sharp reminder of everything she had been. "Ready?" he asked. She nodded, her breath ragged. "I'm ready." The hum of the system filled the small room, a soft chorus of static and electric song. She felt the old commands stir in her mind, the Dominion's voice like a distant thunder. But then silence, and in that quiet, her own voice rose. She opened her eyes and met his gaze. "I'm still me," she said. Jax smiled, his eyes bright with something she hadn't dared name. "You always were," he said. The ship moved on, the stars outside cold and silent, but inside there was warmth, a pulse, a promise. And for the first time in memory, she believed she could be more than what they had made her. The next day, the Iron Wren moved through a region of silent stars, the hull singing softly with each subtle correction in its course. She stood at the viewport, watching the dance of distant lights. Once, the darkness had frightened her. Now it felt like a canvas, empty, waiting. Jack stood behind her, close but not crowding. She could feel his presence in the quiet, the calm of his breath, the steady strength of his hands. "What do you see out there?" he asked. She tilted her head, red hair glinting in the ship's soft glow. "A place I've never been," she said. "A place I can choose?" He smiled. "That's all it's ever been," he said. 1,000 choices waiting in the dark. She turned to face him, her hand brushing the worn metal of the bulkhead. "I want to learn," she said. "Not just how to fix things, but how to live." "You're already doing it," he said. "Every breath, every step." She let the words settle in her chest, a warmth that pushed back the last echoes of the Dominion's commands. "What about you?" she asked. "What do you want?" He hesitated, a flicker of old pain in his eyes. "To make sure you never have to ask that question again," he said. "To give you the chance to be whoever you want to be." She reached out, her hand resting on his chest, feeling the slow beat of his heart. "Then stay," she said softly. "Stay and see what I become." He nodded, his hand covering hers. "I will," he said, "for as long as you want me to." The stars outside turned slowly, cold and eternal, but inside the Iron Wren there was warmth and music, and the quiet promise of tomorrow. She took a breath. Steady even. The Dominion's ghosts were still there, faint and distant, but they no longer defined her. She was something new, something of her own making, and in the soft glow of the ship's lights, she allowed herself to dream. The Iron Wren drifted on, a small, defiant flame in the endless dark. In its quiet heart, two souls found the space to heal. A girl who had been a weapon, a man who had learned that kindness was the sharpest blade of all. They did not know what tomorrow would bring. They did not need to, because tomorrow was a choice, and for the first time they had both chosen to be more than what the world had made them. And in the quiet between heartbeats, in the hum of the ship's core, in the soft chords of an old guitar, they began to write a song that was theirs alone, a song of freedom, of healing, of hope, the first step of forever. If you enjoyed this journey into the quiet spaces between stars and the courage it takes to heal, subscribe to Minter Future Tales for more stories of distant worlds and the fragile, beautiful power of the human spirit. Leave a like, share with fellow dreamers, and join us as we explore the stories that live in the shadows of the cosmos.